Chapter 9, Minnesota's Civil War. And kids, this chapter is so important. I really want you to remember this your whole life. This is about the Dakota War of 1862. But on this first slide, these are the true statements from the chapter that you would have on a chapter test. And on number 1, it says Agent Thomas Galbraith was in charge of distributing the annuities. And you might say, well, what's an annuity? Well, that's our payment. When we made these treaties, we said we would make payments to pay for it. And like your parents make a car payment or a house payment, we made land payments, and it was called an annuity. And the agent at the reservation, his name was Agent Thomas Galbraith. And that was his job when the United States sent the money. It was his job to distribute it to the Indians on the reservation. Number 2 is the Lower Sioux Agency was a site of the Dakota War. In fact, I believe that's where it began, was at the Lower Sioux Agency, right there on the reservation. Number 3, not all of the Dakota took part in the fighting. You know, there were traditional Dakota and farm Dakota. And farm Dakota were promised many things by the government. If you cut your hair, if you wear white men's clothing, if you farm, you live in a house that looks like a white house, you know, brick or wood or whatever, we'll give you extra food. Because that was also part of the annuities, was getting food to them, food and money. And so those Dakota did not take part in the war, and not even all of the traditional Dakota took part in the war. Number 4, farm Dakota lived in wood or brick houses, and I had stated that before. They were to live as white people. That's what our government wanted of the Indians, to lose their culture, not have their culture at all anymore. Basically, our government wanted them annihilated or extinct or out of Minnesota. And that is our first statement here. And this is our next slide. Now, this is not going to be on the test, but this is some things that people have said. And but I am not going to have it on the test, but I want you to think about this. One Dakota leader, Wamdatonka, said, if the Indians had tried to make the whites live like them, the whites would have resisted, and it was the same with many Indians. In other words, what he's saying, if we Indians made you white people be like us, you wouldn't like it. Why would you think we would like it? The next bullet, Trader Andrew Myrick said, if they are hungry, let them eat grass. He was a very bad man, in my point of view. He owned trade stores at both the Lower and Upper Sioux agencies. When we were late with the government was late with payments, he wouldn't open up his store. They were starving. And like I said, he said, if they are hungry, let them eat grass. The next bullet, settler Mary Schwant said, I now knew that my family had been plundered, and I believe murdered. I was very, very wretched, and cared not how soon I too was killed. She was not at her family's home. She was working at another settler's house, and while she was away, her family was attacked, and they were murdered. And she was attacked with a couple of other girls and some men, and the men were killed in their wagon, and she was kept as captive. The traditional Dakota leader Teoteduta said, if you strike at the white people, they will turn on you and devour you and your women and little children, just as the locusts in their time fall on the trees and devour all the leaves in one day. He didn't want to go to war. He knew that they weren't going to win, but he stood beside them, and still went on to lead them. A farm Dakota man by the name of Teope said, "We counseled," which means we talked to the Dakota, "but we could do nothing to resist them. They were very angry. There were so few of us and so many more of them, and they were between us and the settlements, so there was just nothing we could do to stop them." And one of the missionaries there at the reservation, missionary Stephen Riggs, said, "If the Indians have done wickedness, they should have something like a fair trial, even for our own sake." So he didn't want unfair trials, he wanted fair trials. On this note, list at least 3 pieces of evidence to support the following statement. And the following statement is, the Dakota were pressured to give up their traditional way of life. And the Indians were pressured to give up all of their culture and accept the white culture. That is what his job was. The Indians were to give up their culture and do the white culture. Missionaries tried to get the Indians to become Christians, to believe in God, to absolutely forget what their beliefs were. A farm Dakota had to cut their hair. They had to dress like white people. Also, the government promised extra food to any Dakota that became a farm Dakota. All of this truly to get the Native American, the Dakota, to give up their culture totally. How did the missionaries treat Dakota? Well, the missionaries wanted them to convert to Christianity. They wanted them to believe in God, the white way, not their way at all. And there were some missionaries that did speak up for the Dakota, and some of them were against unfair trials. How did the traders' behavior help cause the Dakota War? Well, they cheated them. And the Indians didn't trust them because they knew they were being cheated. And when the annuities were late from the United States, the traders wouldn't give them credit or open their stores. That's when Andrew Myrick said, "If they're hungry, let them eat grass. I'm not opening my store until I get my money." So why did many Dakota choose to fight after the killings at Acton? Now you might want to say, what's the killing at Acton? Well, that's the time where the young Indian, young boys, young men were out, and it was a thing of stealing eggs from a white settler. And I've read a couple of different stories on it, and they left peacefully, but then went back and murdered the family. So when those young men went back to the tribe was like, "Oh no, this is trouble. This is bad," and even if we turn them over to the government, it's going to be bad punishment for all of us. So they truly believed they'd be punished no matter if they chose to fight or not. And they also knew that a lot of the men were gone for the Civil War. So they knew the whites would be very distracted by that it would be a good time to act, because, as I said, we were starving them to death. They couldn't hunt. They couldn't leave the reservation without permission. And if they did, it was okay for anybody to shoot and kill them. It wasn't a crime to do that. I mean, we were absolutely doing horrible things to them. So how did the Dakota War affect the white settlers? Well, it's the white settlers that the Dakota attacked, and over 500 of them were killed. And So there weren't very many white settlers remaining after the war. When all of this was said and done, they did start coming back. So what happened to the Dakota after the war? Well, they had unfair trials, and Henry Sibley conducted these trials, and he sentenced 303 Dakota to death. And President Lincoln, back then, a president had to sign hanging orders. And as I've told you before, the Indians were the lowest of the low. As you even heard in one of the movies we showed you. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but there was great pressure on him to not pardon any of these Indians, to hang them all. So it was bad. But Henry Whipple did go to him, and they talked, and finally President Lincoln signed the order for 38 Dakota to be hanged at Mankato the day after Christmas, December 26, 1862, at 10 a.m. in the morning. And that's exactly what happened. The largest mass hanging execution ever in the United States. Then we put about 1,600 Dakota men, women, and children in a prison at Fort Snelling, and we marched them there. They were stoned on the way. A woman's baby was pulled out of her arms and smashed against a rock until it was dead and thrown back at her. It was a horrible, horrible thing. And they died in the prison camp of starvation and disease and the cold weather. Well, then we put them, when it got to be spring, we put them on steamboats right there at Fort Snelling, and took them all the way down the Mississippi to Hannibal, St. Louis area, and put them on a train, which took them all the way across Missouri, and it stopped at St. Joseph, Missouri, where I'm from. We then put them on steamboats again and took them up the Missouri River and dumped them off in South Dakota, truly in a wasteland. There was nothing to hunt, nothing, they couldn't plant anything. It was a horrid, horrid, desolate place for them. And they also ended up in Nebraska also.